In the medieval galleries of the Cleveland Museum of Art, there are 3 panels from a casket with scenes from courtly romances. They are carved out of ivory and vary in size from around 10 inches to 13 inches tall and 26 inches wide. The ivory panels come from the Gothic period, 1330 to 1350 or later, in the Lorraine region of France. Both the artist and the patron are unknown, as is typical from the Middle Ages. 2 of the panels are in near perfect condition, while one has some damage around the edges. The panels originally would have been, along with 2 others, attached to a casket, or a type of decorated box that was popular in the Middle Ages. This box does not survive in full. The 3 panels are made of ivory and would have been set with other ivory carvings. The casket was probably given as a courtly gift, as the imagery on the panel suggests. The first panel is the largest central panel in the group. This panel would have acted as a lid because of its large shape. It is divided into 4 sections, all with a central theme. On the center 2 panels of the lid, 2 knights joust in typical medieval fashion. They are wearing medieval jousting attire with helmets, chainmail, and metal shoulder covers. The jousters are distinguished by their helmet and clothing designs. Men and women of the court are in the central scene to witness the joust that appears to be in action, with both jousters about to collide. On the right side of the lid panel, knights surround a castle in hopes of reaching the women inside. Raymond Coquelin, the author of the standard work of French Gothic ivories published in 1924, would have referred to this right side as the Siege of the Castle of Love. In scenes of this type, knights invade a castle to court the women inside. In this particular scene, 3 knights are attacking a castle. One is packing a catapult with roses, 2 are climbing a tree and a ladder, and a third is with 2 women inside the castle. The far left side of the lid is the scene that occurs after the siege of the castle. At the top, 2 women and a knight are together, with the knight removing his hood. Moving down the scene, a knight caresses the cheek of a woman. Below that, there are 2 scenes of escape, one with the knight and a lover on horseback, and another with a knight and a lover in a boat rowed by a page. These 2 escape scenes imply some sort of elopement among the lovers. An object of almost identical imagery is the Metropolitan Museum of Art's casket, an ivory belonging to a group of 8 full caskets of medieval Romance imagery attributed to a Parisian ivory workshop in the first half of the 14th century. All of these ivories are inspired by medieval courtly romances and are secular personal belongings that would have been given as gifts to wealthy young, probably female members of French society. The Metropolitan Museum's ivory contains an almost identical lid, with the jousts, siege of the Castle of Love, and elopement scenes all closely relating to this Cleveland ivory. The second panel is the most damaged of the 3, but luckily maintains almost all of its design. This panel has an empty space where a handle would have once existed. This implies that this panel is the front panel of the casket. Like the lid, the front panel has images of courtly romance. Moving left to right, the scenes include a fountain of youth, a capture of a unicorn, a couple in a tower supported by an elephant, and the god of love aiming his arrow. Fountains of youth were popular in secular art in the Middle Ages. They were born out of the Alexander legends of the late 12th century. The fountain is in the center of the scene, with young people bathing in it. Above the fountain, in a sectioned off area of the scene, older people, suggested by both their medieval clothing and the wrinkled skin and beards on the men, are shown. This scene is somewhat unique in the way that it displays the characters. Normally, older people would be depicted entering the fountain on one side, and younger people would be shown leaving the fountain on the other side. This would follow the narrative sequence, with older people entering the fountain and arising out as their younger selves. In this case, the older and younger people are more separate, but their role in the scene is no less important. The second scene is the capture of a unicorn. This is a common allegory of the virgin. Legend said that only a virgin could tame and capture a unicorn, and this imagery was used throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. The importance in this ivory relates to the courtly role of the unicorn. While it can hold religious symbolism as well, the unicorn here is more representative of the male pursuit of the female in the courting process. In this particular image, the male is in the process of killing the unicorn, another common depiction in scenes of this type. The last two scenes on this panel are interconnected. The first one, on the second half of the center panel, depicts two lovers in a castle supported by an elephant. The use of the elephant as support for the castle probably is a symbol of recognition for the use of ivory tusks to create the casket. It is obvious that the sculptor had little knowledge of the actual appearance of an elephant, but relied on description to create the image. For medieval carvers, guessing the appearance of foreign creatures was common. Both lovers in the scene are holding roses inside the castle. The male lover inside the castle is leaning out to give a rose to the god of love. In the final scene, the god of love is shooting an arrow at the lovers. His arrows, instead of an arrowhead, have a rose on the end of them. All of this imagery is common of scenes from ivory caskets and other personal items from the Middle Ages. However, this Cleveland ivory is unique in some stylistic ways that will only become more apparent as we move to the back. The third and final panel from the group would have been on the back of the casket. Like the other two panels, it represents courtly romance scenes. There are three main scenes, like on the front panel, that feature a knight entering a castle, Gawain and the lion, and Lancelot on the sword bridge. All of these scenes are often seen on other surviving caskets from this period and represent the Arthurian story that was so popular in the Middle Ages. These scenes blend well with the romance scenes, as the ideas of chivalry and bravery go hand in hand with the courtly romance. The first scene depicts a knight entering a castle with an old man holding a key at the top. This scene, like the Fountain of Youth scene, is somewhat unique. It is thought that because of either a lack of space or a desire to compact the scenes, these two scenes were made smaller. In order to fit all of the important characters in, they were moved to the top. The identities of these characters is still debated today, with some saying that the old man is Galahad from the Arthurian story. Others suggest that Gawain is the knight who is shown entering the castle. For the sake of this particular casket, the idea that Gawain would be shown previous to the scene with him and the lion makes the most sense. The next scene shows Gawain and the lion. The scene derives from an episode from Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, and follows an incident where swords and arrows fell upon Gawain, who was resting on a bed. In the story, a lion attacks Gawain, and Gawain cuts off the lion's paw that remains attached to his shield. He then severs the lion's head. The final scene is divided between the last two panels. This scene represents Lancelot on the sword bridge on his journey to rescue Guinevere. The story was taken from a 13th century prose titled Lancelot. This scene and the Gawain scene are tied together purely out of convenience for the sculptor of the ivory. Usually, these ivory panels contain the scene of Gawain resting, like in the casket mentioned earlier from the Metropolitan Museum, but this imagery is left out here. The Met ivory is of the more typically Parisian style, with a separate scene of Gawain in his bed and Lancelot walking the bridge of swords. For compositional reasons, the artist would have left the falling swords and arrows in the image. This contributes to the flow of the piece, instead of following the story word for word. While these ivory caskets were typical of medieval Paris, and some can be attributed to that area, this Cleveland ivory is of a unique style more attributed to the Lorraine region of France. Typical of ivory carving at this time, numerous carvers would have worked on this one piece, allowing for some difference in style and interpretation of the scenes. The desire for ivory in the Middle Ages was impressive. After there was an ivory shortage in the 12th century, it wasn't until the 13th century that ivory made a strong comeback. When it was discovered again in Northern Europe, new objects were created and the desire for personal ivories grew. Ivory carvers would develop unique looks, like the artists in the Paris workshop, which allowed the pieces to stand out from similar works. While the importance of the identity of the artist wasn't revived until the Renaissance, medieval sculptors would develop unique styles, as in this Cleveland ivory, and the contextually similar but stylistically different ivory caskets from Paris. Secular ivories like this Cleveland casket were given as tokens of love and devotion. They were playful and romantic, with chivalric, courtly scenes that would have been perfectly placed among the personal objects of the young, aristocratic women of the Middle Ages.